Welcome to our Wednesday interview. Today I am really excited about our guest. With me today is Kari Earle. She has her master's in counseling and consulting psychology from Harvard University, her bachelor's in child development and family relations. She has over 28 years of experience working with multi-system collaborative solutions to challenging health and human service problems that impact some of our most vulnerable populations. She is one of the leading experts on family-centered treatment, substance use disorders during pregnancy, and children impacted by substance exposure. And on a more personal note, Kari was one of the first people that I reached out to about this non-formed idea of Sage Home, and she helped me really kind of put what I was feeling and thinking together, and has been one of Sage Home's biggest supporters. So thank you for being here, Kari.
Thrilled to be here.
So as we start, you are the first person that we've interviewed that has really done the work that we're trying to do and has been in the system and that really kind of knows the dynamics of family-centered treatment. And I just want to tap into your experience a little bit. What are some of the things that really stand out to you when you look back over your experience with family-centered treatment?
That is a big question and a great question. So I'll try not to just go all over the place. But I think for me, the premise of all of it, and it might be helpful to just put a timeline on this. I came into this work back in the mid-90s and started from a state level policy perspective when FASD was really emerging as a massive problem. And that was also along the same time that the cocaine epidemic was hitting the United States. And our focus was really, we were just starting to learn at that time about substance exposed infants and how substances impacted infants, and the system response was and continues, frankly, to be very punitive to women and families. And I know you've talked a lot in other interviews about that impact that has when we separate mothers and infants and families in this effort to create child safety. And for me, it was so upsetting and also very compelling when I heard somebody speak about how it was ridiculous to think that the interests of a mother and child are ever disconnected, that we would ever approach trying to help support a mom without thinking about the needs of her, not just her newborn, but all the other members of her family, however she defined that family. And so that became a real drive for me to seize the opportunity that I had at that time to take leadership of a community-based organization that was at the time providing pretty traditional model of treatment. Actually, I shouldn't say traditional because it was we were only one of two in the state. I live in Nevada. And the organization that I led was only one of two in the state that accommodated women and their children. But it was also limited in a lot of ways, and in the ways that many organizations still are across the country that do that. And it is nonetheless a version of family-centered treatment, but the limitation of either the age of the child or the number of children she could have with her, or the lack of ability to involve a partner, those were all still very significant limitations and created some real barriers and challenges to her healing and her treatment process. And so that was the impetus for fixing what I felt was broken. And not just me. I mean, I think the whole point, and we'll probably be talking about this, was that there were a lot of stakeholders in changing the game up to improve the outcomes for families by addressing families as a whole unit.
Yeah, and that's something that I really appreciate when you talk about this, is that there's so much more going on than just the treatment center. Like, it's a community-wide approach. There's this philosophy that you have behind what you do, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that still to me today is um, an opportunity that I think a lot of people that are working in this space miss, which is, and this is true regardless of whether you're a treatment center or a child welfare agency or a parole and probation officer or some other person who is touching the lives of these families and doing it through a very singular lens. And so I've learned, especially, frankly, stepping away from that leadership role in the early 2000s and now doing this work nationally, I see so much more clearly how we thought our treatment center was the center of her world. And we structure programming that is ultimately not very user-friendly because we see ourselves, you know, if I'm a treatment facility, I see myself as the primary service provider and treatment planner and, you know, whatever else we're putting together to support her treatment and her recovery. And in doing that, we start defining women by their substance use disorder as opposed to by who they are as people. You know, in the same way that it would be the case if we put everybody who had diabetes in a treatment center because that was the lens we were looking at. I don't know if that's kind of coming across the way that I want it to, but the point being that by partnering with, you know, by bringing together all of the community entities that have a mission to improve the health and well-being of families and therefore the community, you start to learn how to understand from a person-centered perspective what it takes to heal versus from a system perspective what it takes to heal. And that is a tricky but absolutely critical thing to be able to make that paradigm shift.
Wow. And do you have any examples of that in your experiences?
Yeah, one that was especially back in the 90s and early 2000s, a particularly kind of fraught issue. I think it still is, but I think we've come some way, was around domestic violence and interpersonal violence and the impact that that has on families. And so we had, you know, our family treatment court was considered a national model, and we were a partner in that family treatment court, a really, you know, kind of critical partner. And the judge at the time would not allow a woman to bring her partner in with her into court if there was any history of violence, which was really limiting, you know, self-limiting in terms of looking at how to help that man, or, I mean, you know, that usually it was a man, so I'm just going to default to some traditional gender terms, but, you know, that he would not let that person, you know, that man come in, even if they were married. And when we started working on developing a campus neighborhood approach that allowed families to live together, to work, they weren't, you know, to not feel like we needed to be the police of all their movements. Of course, we needed to maintain safety and provide the kind of structure that evidence has shown is helpful in supporting that turnaround from a kind of an addiction-based lifestyle to a recovery lifestyle. We got a lot of pushback when, one of the things I did, I'm gonna shift for a second here rather than finish that sentence. One of the things that we did was had focus groups with the women that were currently in our program to find out what needed to look different for them to feel like they could succeed. And again and again and again, they said they needed to have their partners involved, because most of the time when they left successfully and completed treatment, the fact that there was still a partner that hadn't been able to go through treatment with them and learn the same new parenting skills, new relationship skills, new interpersonal skills, it was a setup to fail across the board. And you could see the ripple effects through all the systems. You know, the child welfare system would be saying, well, you know, here's kind of they've already had one case open, so they were already kind of put in a higher risk scenario. For treatment, a lot of times the rules were you can't come back once you've, I mean, there was just a lot of really illogical rules and principles and policies that we put in place. So when we did the focus groups and when we heard that feedback and when we talked to the women very frankly about what would it feel like to live on a campus where there were other men on the campus, you know, if you've gone through trauma around domestic violence or any kind of interpersonal violence, family history, I was shocked to hear how accepting they were, and I shouldn't have been, because that's the community that they've in some cases come from. And so for us to be able, rather than ignore that as a reality, but actually incorporate it into the way that we created a therapeutic model and didn't turn away from it, it was a game changer to be able to have, and we really didn't have all of the scary problems that people anticipated in terms of on-campus problems. And they were manageable because the community came together to help manage them when something did arise, which again was really rare. So that's one example of a massive paradigm shift, and one that at the time our domestic violence agency partner was not happy that we were taking that approach. And then they, you know, and we worked together to kind of come up with the resolution around that everybody could feel like they could live with. But ultimately it's about these families and what they're dealing with, and not us kind of layering on our own judgment about what that should look like. Because at the end of the day, just like in child welfare, you see these families that are split apart and potentially have children that age out of the foster care system. Where do they go back to? They go back to their parents. You know, family is ultimately, at the end of the day, the core of a person's being in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So something that I'm really hearing you say is, instead of the system being the one that decides what's needed for there to be healing and recovery, it's putting that and empowering that back on the person who kind of knows what's best for their life, and supporting them with all that other community support around them, and trusting that they have what it takes to really engage with their kid and engage in the community in a way that is healing.
Yes, exactly. It's so hard to see so many women that need help and want help, but can't access the help because they're not willing to make the sacrifices that we require of them to come into our care. And that is it's a tough nut. It's not an easy scenario to figure out how to accommodate a lifestyle that brings with it a lot of risk and potentially, danger. I mean, you've obviously got to create a safe space for people to come together and heal. And in some cases, it is appropriate to say, this person in your life isn't willing to participate with you, so there's a choice to be made there. But you're right, as a system, it's not our job to do anything but pull together the kind of supports, use those resources to empower people to live their lives as healthily as they can live them.
Right. Yeah, because at the end of the day, the goal is that they can trust their decisions and themselves and their ability to keep their family safe.
Yes, and not be defined by one aspect of their life.
Oh man, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds great, and I'm sure it's going to be really hard when we put this into practice, but something that's been great about Sage Home is that we've had so many parts of the community supporting and being a part of this project. And that is the exciting part. And that's the exciting piece, because those are the resources that give the opportunity for the clients to engage in the community. And it's more than treatment. It's Girl Scouts, like you mentioned in conversations, and all sorts of things that we don't think about.
And it's also more sustainable. I mean, when the community owns it, then it's not Marca's job to make sure that you're constantly getting the funding, or you're constantly, at some point it becomes a handoff to say, not that you're not always going to be really a critical piece of the leadership, but that's the goal, is to have it be sustained by the community's vision, which is your vision. And it's a shared vision, and it's one that allows everybody to have a role. I mean, one of our successes was engaging like the Rotary clubs to, that sometimes had a hard time knowing, they wanted to support, that's their mission, is to be in the business of making a community's quality of life better. But a lot of times the only way they know to do that is to hand, some small grants out, and not necessarily, and it's hard sometimes to put a face on the people that they're there to help. And one of the things that we were able to do was have them kind of get into this adoption program where they adopted a cottage and furnished that cottage, and the family that was living there, when they successfully were, completed care, whatever they went in, were ready to move on, took all of those belongings with them and were able to set up a new home. And the Rotary Club would come back, or Seroptimus would come back in and furnish the next one. And in a lot of cases, relationships were built directly with those families. And, sometimes those women, or usually women, would sign up and become members of Seroptimus. I mean, it really did become a powerful way to remove some of the barriers of the we-they scenario that we often kind of get stuck in.
And that's, to me, is such a fun image to land on. This kind of bottom-up, organic, let's come together, and through that, these creative ideas emerge that connect instead of control, in these siloed type treatments.
Yes.
Like, it brings people together and allows for that further connection.
Yeah. And it requires some risk taking on the part of Sage Home and your partners. And I love your model, because you are doing that risk taking. You are thinking differently about, I mean, I think our original conversations were just the acknowledgement that what existed wasn't working. So to be able to take those risks and try something new, even if it's been tried in some places, and we've been able to share those ideas, I'm excited to see and hear about all those things that you all are doing that we didn't try, and I wish we would have tried. I mean, it just is organic. It does, good ideas beget good ideas, especially when you involve the people in the process that you're serving, and not seeing them as not collaborative with you.
Yeah, seeing them as like part of the process and not something to fix.
Yes, thank you. Exactly.
Awesome. Kari, thank you so much for doing this and for all of the support you've given us along the way. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you, rooting for you 100%, and just really excited to see this take off the way that it's taking off. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, we will definitely be in touch, because I keep having to have questions. So I will be talking to you soon, and I really appreciate you showing up for this.
Okay, my pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.